Welcome to another episode of 20 Minutes with Troy, where I sit down with a wide variety of professionals to uncover and discuss the issues that dentists face in their personal and practice lives. These interviews are an extension of the work of my firm, Advisory Resource Group, which has been assisting the needs of dentists and medical professionals as an advisor and a consultant for more than 15 years. Stay tuned at the end of this episode to learn more about Advisory Resource Group and the offer that I make to every dentist who finds value in this series. I'm excited today to have Greg Whitmer with me from Bank of America Practice Solutions. Good morning, Greg.
Good morning, Troy. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Greg, maybe we want to start by, if you would, just sort of give a quick introduction of Bank of America Practice Solutions and what types of situations you find yourself involved in. And then my thought was maybe we could just sort of go through each of those situations, maybe one by one, to sort of give dentists a sense of how you can help them and when they would need to call you and at what stage of the process, et cetera. But before we jump into that,
absolutely.
Why don't I let you kind of give yourself a 2-minute commercial?
Sounds good. Thanks, Troy. Yeah, so like you said, my name is Greg Whitmer with Bank of America Practice Solutions. So I oversee our dental division here in New England. So I'm based in Boston, but I cover the whole New England territory. So basically, I'm dental specific. Like I said, I oversee our dental division here in New England for the Practice Solutions division of Bank of America, which is part of our small business division within Bank of America. So we deal strictly with healthcare lending, dental, which of course is what I do. We also do veterinary and medical. So basically any dentist across New England that is in need of any types of financing for their practice, nothing individually I would handle, but anything practice related. So whether that be buying a practice, doing a renovation at an office, buying equipment, buying the real estate potentially for the office where it's located or where they may be going. Really anything that the doctor needs financing for, that's what I'm here for. That's our area of expertise. We've been doing this for 20 plus years now. We've been bought out by Bank of America back about 10 years ago now, but the division itself has been around for almost 25 years. So we certainly have a level of expertise. We have a home office in Columbus, Ohio, where all of our underwriting and all of our compliance and funding and we have an office of about 400 people back in Columbus that handles just this division. So, and then we have people like myself across the country, whether it be dental, medical, or vet, that are here to help with dentists finding that are in need of any financing for their practice, and that's what we're here to help them do.
Awesome. Thanks, Greg. Appreciate that.
Yep.
Well, why don't we go ahead and get started then? So maybe let's begin with renovation, and maybe you could just walk us through, a little bit of the process when, someone is thinking about renovating their practice. When should they contact you, sort of, as it relates to contacting the builder and other people that would be involved in that? And then just kind of tell us a little bit about what that process looks like, what they need to do, when you guys are involved, and just kind of give us a sense of how that might work.
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of look at renovation and expansion as the same thing. So, obviously you may have a doctor that is looking to simply renovate within the current office that they have. Maybe they're looking to, just do some upgrades, a facelift, if you will, at the office. Kind of a similar thing would be an expansion. Sometimes I'll get a call, a doctor, space has come open next door and they're looking to knock the wall down and they're going to add whatever it may be, maybe a couple more operatories. Maybe a bigger waiting area or a staff room or whatever it is to the office. So renovation, expansion, kind of a similar product in terms of what the doctor's looking to do. And basically the way that works is, I think probably like anybody would say, we want to be involved as early as possible, especially on the financing side. I think if a doctor is planning on doing a project and are planning to renovate the office or expand the office, they want to make sure, unless they know they're sitting on a bit of a pile of cash and they're just going to finance it themselves, which most doctors would prefer not to do that if they don't have to. You don't want to have to write a big check if you don't have to. So, they want to understand what kind of financing they're going to be able to get. So first of all, what the amount is. Obviously, they're going to be interested in what the terms are, but they want to be able to know, can they get financed? How much can they get financed for? And is that going to be enough to cover what they're trying to do at the office? Is it a $100,000 project? Is it a $500,000 project? So the earlier that I'm involved and that we're involved and we can get it through underwriting see what type of approval we can get, the better. I always tell my doctors, whatever the product, I would rather be waiting on them than them waiting on me. So the earlier that they're involved and the earlier that I'm involved in the process, because that way, if anything does pop up on a credit report or anything with their cash flow that my underwriters maybe are a little bit skeptical of, we have time to get around that and figure it out before the doctor really, as opposed to the doctor coming to me and saying, hey, the contractor started last week, he's going to need his first payment in a week. Can I get a $200,000 loan? And then we may take a couple of weeks to get it done because we run into a hiccup. So to answer your question, I'd rather be involved as early as possible so we can get around all that kind of stuff, see what we can get approved for, and then figure out, and working with the contractor, working with whoever else is involved, what the scope of the project is, how much the doctor's going to need, and then kind of tailor the budget around that.
How long does that process take? So when a doctor comes to you and says, Greg, I need some money, I want to get my renovation started, how long do you guys need to do that?
Yeah, it's a pretty quick process. I mean, for anyone that's doing a renovation is obviously going to be an established doctor that already has an office. So what we need from an established doctor is just a filled out application, which is a 2-page application. It will take them 15, 20 minutes to fill out, if that. If they have your help, it shouldn't even take them that long. And then we just need the last couple of years of tax returns. So we'll grab the last 3 years of personal and business tax returns. At this time of year, as we sit here in June, we would need a year-to-date profit and loss statement as well, since so far along into the year. But that's all we need. We'll collect that stuff. I have a person that works with me from our home office, kind of almost in an administrative type role, that will help gather that stuff with us. And then we'll put the package together. We'll get it into underwriting. So as soon as we get the full package, which obviously that could take a couple of days, if the doctor's on top of it, it could take 2 weeks. Sometimes we're tracking this stuff down for a while, as you would assume. But if the doctor gets us stuff pretty quickly, let's say we get the whole package on a Monday, we'll get that put together and then we'll set up a credit interview. The doctor will actually speak directly to our underwriter, and we'll have that set up within a couple of days. So we'll find a good day and time that works for the doctor. It's only about a 20-minute phone call. So if they get us the full package on Monday, we'll probably be able to have the interview scheduled by the end of that week or the beginning of the following week at the latest. And then we'll get a decision back from underwriting within typically 2 or 3 business days of the interview. So if we have a full package on a Monday, and we have everything we need and we go into underwriting, within a week and a half, we should have a decision back from underwriting. So it happens pretty quickly.
And what are they basing that decision on when you talk about underwriting? Is it a cash flow based decision? Is it existing debt? All of the above? Does somebody, let's say somebody has just purchased a practice, and we'll get into that in a moment, but does there need to be a cooling off period before you're essentially going to kind of give them more money, or how are some of those decisions made?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So we are a cash flow based lender. So cash flow is very, very important. So basically the easiest way to explain that, since I know we want to get into other topics today, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, and it's something you kind of want to see, in front of you. But the easiest way to explain cash flow for someone that doesn't, do this every day is basically the underwriter is going to look at the practice. It's going to look at how much cash that practice is spitting off. So it's going to look at the overhead of the practice, what the doctor is paying him or herself. They're going to look at the cash that is being spit off from the office, and then seeing if that can cover basically the doctor. Can that afford the doctor? So we're going to look at a global cash flow. So not only the overhead at the office, but all the doctor's personal expenses. So his or her mortgage, car payments. We're obviously going to factor in living expenses, any other payments that they may have. And as long as that practice is covering the doctor's cost expenses, that's a good cash flow. We typically look for what we call 1.2 or above debt service coverage. Sometimes we can get a little bit lower than that depending. And all debt service coverages, that 1.2 number represents that the doctor is making $1.20 for every dollar that they're expensing. So that's really the quick kind of explaining of cash flow. As far as what else is looked at, we of course are going to look at the credit report and make sure there's nothing on there that gives us any pause for concern. We don't want to see bankruptcies, short sales, those type of things that you would assume any bank is going to be a little bit concerned with. Sure. As far as the credit score, really anything up north of 700 is going to be good for us. That makes us feel comfortable at that point. And then we're going to look at the doctor's personal financial statement. So we're going to look at what does the doctor look like personally. Are they someone that looks like they handle money well? they're a good borrower, someone that we're going to be comfortable giving this $300,000 loan or $800,000 loan or $1,500,000 loan. So when I say personal financial statement, the one thing that we're going to look at, and this is something we can get off a credit report as well, are they carrying any type of credit card debt? Obviously, as you would assume, we don't really want to see that. Not that they can't have any. You start getting north of 20, 25, 30,000 in credit card debt, we're going to want to understand what that story is. And the other big thing that we look at is, other than, of course, their payments, like we talked about before, any expenses that they have, monthly expenses, is their liquidity. That's a big thing for us. We want to make sure that this doctor has a nest egg in the bank on their own, so that we feel comfortable that, again, they're good with money, they know how to handle it. We don't need a doctor to have $1 million in the bank, especially a newer doctor that maybe is looking to do their first office or is relatively new as an associate. But we understand that they're not going to have necessarily $300,000 or $400,000 in the bank, but we want to see that there's something in there. Just for an example, the number we typically are looking at, it's not black and white, but something to go off of is we like to see 10% of the loan request. So if a doctor is requesting $600,000, we'd like to see that they have at least $60,000 in the bank. And that's liquid money. So that's not equity in a home. It's not money that's in a retirement account. It's cash on hand that the doctor can access today without paying a penalty. So marketable securities, any cash value life insurance, obviously checking and savings. That's what we're looking for. We look at liquidity. So just getting a well-rounded picture of the doctor and their financial situation and making sure this is a borrower that we're comfortable.
So let's segue this conversation into acquisition then. So someone wants to purchase a practice, they need to have that liquidity set aside, let's call it 10%. So if they were purchasing $1 million practice, they need to have about $100,000 set aside. Talked about student loans and so forth. How does that play into the conversation when you're talking about cash flowing the practice, but then their personal financial statement? And given that they're coming from maybe an associate position, talk a little bit about how you guys are looking at that.
Yep, exactly. So like, as you mentioned in that example, if they're looking to buy $1 million office, we would like to see $100,000. I always tell my doctors, now if they have $85,000 or $80,000, that doesn't necessarily mean they're going to automatically get declined. If everything else adds up and looks good, you know, that there are certainly some gray areas. But to your point, if someone's looking to buy $1 million office and they're sitting there with $25,000 in the bank, that might be tough for us to get done. In an acquisition situation, what happens is, of course, we now have a selling practice. So we're going to look at that practice. I would always suggest working with a broker or someone like yourself to evaluate that office on their own independently, because that's not necessarily what we're going to do. We're basically just looking at the numbers of the office. And if the cash flow looks good to us, again, look at the total gross revenues, the overhead of the office. If all of those numbers add up and the profitability looks good, we're typically going to look for something around 30% or higher for profitability. Not that, again, if an office is running at 26% profitability, that means that the loan is going to get declined. But as you know, typically a good office, especially a GP office, should be running at 30 to 35% profitability, a specialty office even higher than that. So we're just going to look at those numbers for the office. And we're going to look at the cash, again, the cash flow and what kind of cash that office is spitting out. And then we're going to look at the buyer and we're going to look at his or her personal expenses like we talked about a minute ago. And we're going to look at that within the cash flow. And as long as that practice, again, can afford the buyer, then that particular box gets checked in our underwriters' minds. You mentioned student loans. It's a great question. I get it all the time, especially here in New England. We know student loans can be very, very sizable. You did undergrad here, you did your graduate school here, you did dental school here. It's not uncommon for me to see doctors with $400,000 or $500,000. I just have a doctor the other day with student loans of almost $700,000. So that's not uncommon. Of course, the higher that we see, it does add sometimes to a little more scrutiny maybe from our underwriters. But the big thing with student loans, especially if it's somewhat reasonable, 3, 4, up to $500,000, is it's not the balance so much that we're concerned about, it's what that monthly payment is. So I always encourage, anytime I'm speaking to residents or associates that may be looking to do an office in the next couple of years, if you can refinance your student loans to get onto a longer term so you can get that monthly payment down, that's the bigger concern. Because you don't live your life based off of $400,000 student loan balance, you live your life based off of that $2,000 a month payment. And
Sure.
Our underwriters look at the same thing. So the balance isn't as much of a concern as what are you paying monthly on that balance.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point. That's something that I counsel on fairly regularly because there are different options, especially on the federal loans, in terms of the programs that are available. And so sometimes, the emotion around student loans is getting them paid off as quickly as possible.
Right.
That can sometimes fly in the face of getting finance for a practice. So I'm really glad that you brought that up.
Well, and the
So
thing that I always say to that, to your point, and you know this in your field, we've all been taught for so long that debt is terrible. Get rid of debt, pay everything off as quickly as you possibly can. But when you're a dentist that wants to eventually own your own practice one day, you're going to have to come to me or someone like me, maybe not as charming as me, but someone like me, to get a loan. So you're going to have to come and get more credit, whether it's $4, $5, $6, $700,000. Unlike maybe your friend that you went to college with, that's an accountant or isn't a lawyer or someone that's going to now work for someone for the rest of their lives. So they're pretty much set, other than maybe if they want to go out and buy a house one day. But you're going to have to become a business owner. So you're going to have to come out and get more credit. So the more you can paint a good financial picture, which your payments are a huge part of that, the better. And so to your point, I think it's very, very important because we are all taught at a young age to pay off debt, pay off debt. So most of the time when I talk to doctors, they are in this mode of they wear it like a badge of honor. Well, Greg, I make $6,000 a month payments to my loans, even though I only have to pay two. Isn't that great? And my thought is, yes, in a sense, but if that means you have $10,000 in the bank, like we talked about right now, then it's not so great when you have to come and get a loan from me.
yeah, absolutely. I'm glad you brought that up. Thank you. So maybe let's pivot now into startups, because with the market being as tight as it is, I think a lot of people envision them acquiring a practice. Then they get out into the world and start looking, and a lot of dentists that I'm working with are realizing that there's not a practice to purchase, or at least the one that meets their criteria. So they're finding that they're sort of moving more towards that startup that they might not have thought they would have been before. Can you talk a little
Right.
bit about kind of how that works? And again, are all the same criteria there? But when you don't have that track record of the practice, how does that change things?
Yeah, so it's I'm glad you brought that up. Startups are one thing that we do very, very well. We've been doing it for a long time. A lot of banks out there are still not as interested in startups. They look at it as a little bit more risky, because again, when you're acquiring a practice, they have the financials, they can see the cash flow that's there and what that looks like. A startup, the way we have to underwrite it is we underwrite off of projection. So again, with the length of time that we've been doing this, we've done countless, literally thousands of startup loans over the years. We work with a lot of great accountants across the country, many of which that are dental specific. So we kind of all, put our heads together and have, those numbers to look at and see what we can expect depending on where you are in the country, what type of specialty you are, what we can expect in terms of profitability from that office. And then we look at the projected revenue. So and keep it as short and sweet in layman's terms as possible. We're going to look at those first 3 or 4 years. We're going to have projected revenues. They are somewhat conservative, but I think you would prefer that as the doctor. You don't want to get yourself put in a bad spot. So we look at those projected revenues, and then we then from there, it's very similar to the way we do the loans that we talked about before. We look at the individual doctor that's looking to do this loan with us. We plug in their expenses, and if the projected revenues and profitability of this office is going to be able to cover this doctor, that's how we get an approval. It does work similar in terms of liquidity, probably not quite as hard a number. Again, most of our startup loans are going to be in the $500,000 to $600,000 range, depending on specialty. Again, if you don't have $50,000 or $60,000, but you have 35 or 40, if everything else lines up, in a lot of cases, we're still going to be able to get that done. If you've only been out of school for 2 years, we're going to understand that you're going to have less than someone that's been out of school for 6 and that's been working. So
can you maybe speak to that for a moment? I'm sorry to interrupt, but as far as somebody who is just out of school versus somebody who's 2 or 3 years, do you want some level of proof of productivity, or how do you judge that, or don't you?
So we look more at income at that point than if for an acquisition, a doctor that's buying another practice, we will look at their productivity to make sure they're going to be able to continue to produce the same numbers that office has been producing that they're buying. In terms of a startup, we're looking more at that income because we're going to give that doctor credit for their income in the first year. So we talked about that cash flow. We're looking at year 1, year 2, year 3, sometimes a little bit into year 4. So we're looking at those projected revenues. Obviously, the projected revenues are going to go up each year. But in that first year, those first years are always the hardest to cash flow. The reason being, the revenues are continuing to go up. But in the first year, if we have a doctor that's going to continue to associate while they build up their office, which I would highly recommend, I'm sure you would as well, and most doctors do, because you're just not going to have the business to be in your brand new office 4 days a week. So most of our doctors are going to continue to work 2 or 3 days a week at their associate office, 1 or 2 days a week at their new office, and slowly that will turn as business picks up to 2 or 3 days a week at their office, 1 or 2 days a week at their associate office, until they're in their own office, 9, 12, 15 months in full time. So we're going to give them a credit for their associate income in year one of their cash flow. So if that doctor makes $200,000 a year, we'll credit them for $100,000 in income in year one. The reason it's $100,000 and not $200,000 is we know that they're going to cut back on their hours, of course, once their new office is open. But it's vitally important to the cash flow. It's a huge bonus to the cash flow to get that associate income if you're going to continue to work. We don't require that you continue to work by any means. If the cash flow works without you having an associate income, we don't require that. But my opinion and my recommendation would be that you continue to work, and we will give you credit for that associate income in year one. So the more that you're making as an associate, the more that we can credit you in year one, the more that's going to help your cash flow, and the better chance we're going to have to get an approval for your first time startup practice loan.
Anything else on the startup side, pitfalls, best practices that you could sort of give to the audience in terms of things that you commonly see that, gosh, if I could have just talked to them 2 or 3 years earlier, we wouldn't be in this scenario?
Yeah, so I think kind of going back on what we hit on right at the very beginning when we were talking about renovations and expansions and established doctors doing loans, it would be start building your team early. Talk to someone like yourself, talk to myself. Obviously you and I, this is what we do all day, every day. So we have a great network of people that we can refer that do specific things within the project, be it contractors, equipment reps, CPAs, those type of people that are going to be vitally important when the doctor is starting their practice. Because the thing that I think the doctor has to realize, and probably what scares most of the doctors, is they're still not really getting this type of education in school, is they're experts at the clinical side, but they have virtually no idea how to run the business side. And that can be a little bit overwhelming. So start building a team of people around you right away. As soon as you start thinking you want to do your own office one day, even if you think it's going to be 2 years from now, it never hurts to have a conversation with me, have a conversation with yourself, talk to a CPA, talk to an attorney. I would recommend getting a mentor, whether it's the doctor that you're working for now or a doctor that that has run his or her own office for 10 or 15 years and talk to them about pitfalls that they may have seen. I think the biggest thing is the doctor is just not quite prepared for all the steps that go into doing a startup. But when you build that team of people around you, you want someone that's going to be able to do demographics for you. When you pick out a couple towns that you might want to be in, which town is the best for what it is you want to do? You want to have someone, you might refer to it as a real estate broker. I use the term space finder a lot. There's people out there, dental specific, healthcare specific, that are literally out there looking for spaces for a dentist to lease to do their office. That's what they're out there doing every day. So they know the market, they know what's out there, they know what type of rents make sense. They're going to help you negotiate the lease. Talking to those people now, because when it comes to a startup, if you come to me or yourself today and say, hey, Greg, Troy, I want to do my own office. I want to start up. I'm entrepreneurial. I don't want to buy an office. I want to start my own thing, hire my own staff, and I want to be open by the fall. That's not realistic. It's going to take you, in most cases, a couple of months just to find the space. It'll take you a month or so to negotiate the lease and get the lease signed. And then by the time you settle on a contractor and they're in there working, it's going to be 3 or 4 month build out. So the earlier you can do all of these things and build your team of people around you, even if you just think I want to own my office one day, start having the conversations with people like myself and yourself and other people within the industry that have their own niche of what they're going to do to help you when you build your business. Start having those conversations now, because it will feel very overwhelming as you start to take those steps. But the more people that you have around you that have their niche of expertise of what they're going to do to help you as part of your team, the better and the more comfortable you're going to feel. I would tell you, sorry, I got a little long-winded with that, but I think it's so important. I would tell you that the doctors of mine that have done startups that are the most successful are doctors that I probably worked with for 6 months to a year before they opened their office, and they were building a team of people around them. And they went into it. You never know till those doors open. You're always going to be learning. But they went into it in a much better position than someone who just kind of was flying by the seat of their pants and put things together at the last minute.
Yeah, I'd really echo that. A big part of my value proposition to my clients is creating and facilitating those teams. And I think you're 100% right, which is you're building that trust before you actually need the advice. If someone's already been talking to you for a year, they're going to trust what you say when you say, you know what, this isn't a great situation, or I don't feel comfortable with this. Where if they've never met you, that credibility is hard to get. So I can't echo that enough as well.
Absolutely.
So I think anything else that comes to mind, Greg, I think that kind of hits on the key points that I wanted to chat about today. Certainly anybody can reach out to you individually and talk about this in more detail. But is there anything else that you'd like to hit or you think is important? Maybe quickly just talk about what differentiates Practice Solutions from other banks. Again, I know that people have options of local banks and other large lenders. Is there anything that you'd say that sort of really differentiates Practice Solutions from the others?
Yeah, and then just to hit on this really quick, and you're exactly right. I'm always available. Feel free to reach out to Troy. He can, of course, get you my contact information. Those of you who have not met me before, and I'm always willing to have the conversations. I just want to mention really quick, the other couple things that we do that are helpful to our dentists is debt refinances. So practice debt refinances. In some cases, a doctor may be looking to do an expansion or just buying some equipment and don't feel like they have the cash flow to do that. Well, let's look at your current debt. What are you paying on it? And I help you refinance that and get into a better structure, a better payment situation to maybe free up some of your cash flow. And the other thing would be commercial real estate. Again, commercial real estate. So I can't help you with your mortgage, unfortunately, but I do have someone that can if you want to still reach out to me. But for me personally, anything commercially. So if you're looking to relocate your office or you're looking to just buy, where sometimes I have a lot of doctors that have the opportunity to now buy the real estate where they're currently practicing, that is something that we can do. We do it conventionally, so we don't have to go through the SBAs where you're gonna have a lot more fees and that sort of thing when you have to go with an SBA loan. The SBA loan can be great in certain circumstances. It's there for a reason. It can be very helpful, but we do the loan conventionally. In some cases, if the doctor qualifies, we can do 100% financing. So no money down on the real estate, which is a huge thing for a lot of my doctors. So we can also help any doctor that's looking to buy a commercial real estate for their practice. In terms of differentiating, I would say the biggest differential between ourselves and maybe one of the small local banks, which we do see a lot here in New England, especially as you get further north of Boston, is just our comfortability with dental lending. Most of the small local banks, they, of course, will take your business if they can wrap their arms around it, but they're not doing a lot of dental loans where that's all that we do. We understand the industry, we understand the business, we understand what it takes to make a dental office work. And I think having that with your lender has proved to be vitally important for many of our doctors. So that's one of the biggest differentiators, is we've been doing it the longest out of anybody. We do have a couple of other large banks that are some of our biggest competitors nationally. There's some small things that, when I'm looking at a proposal of mine against a proposal of one of my competitors, that we can pick apart. But the biggest thing, honestly, that I tell most of my doctors is that you're going to get me, you're going to get my team, you're going to get people that understand the industry, have a great referral network of people like Troy and contractors and equipment people that we've worked with for many, many years. And you just want to be, just like anything that you're going to go out there in the free market and purchase or buy, you want to be doing that with someone that you're comfortable with. So, quite honestly, I probably shouldn't say this, but quite honestly, most of my bigger competitors, the structure and the term of the loan is going to be somewhat similar. So it's just working with someone that you feel comfortable with, that you feel like that knows what they're doing and is going to be there for you through the whole process and has a good team of people in the background to support you, not only during the process, but once the practice is open. And I think that's what we do really, really well.
Yeah, 100%. I couldn't agree more. Well, as you alluded to earlier, Greg, there are a few people as charming as Greg Whitmer, so I appreciate the time today.
A few out there, I think.
So again, your information will be here if anyone would like to reach out to you individually. I appreciate your time today, Greg, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you very much, Troy. I appreciate it.
You bet, buddy. Bye-bye. Thank you for joining us for this episode of 20 Minutes with Troy. My firm, Advisory Resource Group, has been assisting the needs of dentists and medical professionals at all stages of their careers for more than 15 years. I'm both a financial advisor and a practice consultant, acting as a problem solver and facilitator to provide one-stop shopping for those seeking strategies, advice, and connections for the challenges that accompany every stage of their personal and practice lives. As a co-pilot and a friend, I assist my clients through the navigation of practice purchase, succession, expansion, attraction and retention of team members, partnership and associate planning, refinancing, and a myriad of other advisory, investment, insurance, and retirement services. I make the offer to meet with every dentist by phone or in person to introduce them to my firm. I don't assume that anyone has a need or interest in our services. My goal is to learn about any pain points they may be experiencing and to establish myself as a resource, whether it be for now or in the future. Please take advantage of this no cost or obligation offer by contacting my office or visiting advisoryresourcegroup.com.